I remember the subject line like it was yesterday. Looking forward to finally hosting you properly. There was something about the way it was worded that set off an alarm in my gut. Too formal, too polished, like a press release masking a bullet. It came from Elaine's personal assistant, but it bore her signature. For 3 years, I had been dating her daughter, Dawn. 3 years of strategically dodged brunches, mysteriously double-booked events, and place settings that ran out one seat too soon. This was the first direct invitation I'd ever received from Elaine herself. Not a casual stop by, not a phone call from Dawn relaying something Elaine supposedly said. A direct, gold-trimmed email that almost gleamed through the screen. I reread it 3 times, searching for sincerity. I found only calculation. In the early days, I gave her the benefit of the doubt. Maybe she was just busy. Maybe she really didn't like crowds. But the pattern became too defined, too deliberate. Business trips on Dawn's birthdays. Health flares that oddly aligned with every family gathering I was supposed to attend. I wasn't born yesterday. When someone doesn't want you in the room, they make sure there's always a very polite excuse. I hadn't even finished reading the email when another notification popped up. A text from Elaine's assistant, meant for someone else. Group chat error. My name wasn't used, not even once, but the message was unmistakably about me. Make sure the place cards are correct. Don't let the sewer girl speak too much. Sewer girl. I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. I took a screenshot and archived it. There's a certain elegance in restraint. Let them think you're ignoring it, while you're documenting every move. I wasn't unfamiliar with language like that. Growing up in the foster system taught me how to decode insults that never needed to be loud. You don't need to shout when the knife slides in quietly under the tablecloth. I waited until evening to show it to Dawn. We were in our kitchen, the one we'd picked together when we moved into the brownstone. She was stirring something, risotto maybe, and humming under her breath. I slid the phone across the counter. She picked it up, read it twice, and her mouth parted like she was about to say something important. But all she offered was, "Mom can be careless with words." Careless? I tilted my head. Would you still go if someone called me that? She didn't say it to you. It was internal. There it was. Not a defense. Not even denial. Just distance. I didn't argue. That's the thing about being underestimated. You learn how to make silence do the talking. The next morning, a physical envelope arrived. The kind of envelope that screams old money and old rules, thick paper, embossed lettering, a wax seal. My name was not on it. The card read simply, Dawn Harrington +1. Not even a scribble of ink to suggest they had thought of me after printing. I held the card in my hand and thought, even unpaid interns at my company get their names on tags. 3 years of shared holidays, hospital visits, career highs, and all I was to them was a +1. It didn't sting. Not in the way it would have a few years ago. This was surgical, intentional, and it confirmed everything I'd suspected. I wasn't being included. I was being tolerated. And barely. I laid the card down, looked at it, and said out loud to no one, "So that's how it's going to be." I didn't text Elaine. I didn't confront Dawn. I confirmed my attendance. Not because I wanted to be there, but because there's value in watching someone reveal themselves. I packed a simple dress, nothing showy, no label screaming from the seams, just enough to say, I belong anywhere. I left the heels behind. I'd be standing tall enough in other ways. As I zipped my suitcase, my phone buzzed again. Calendar update from Elaine's PR assistant, the same one who'd sent the invitation. The event had a new title. Event, Strategic Partnership Gala. Private host, Elaine Group. I stared at the screen. So that's what this really was. Not a dinner to welcome me, a display, a marketing piece. I wasn't a guest. I was the prop. Elaine's estate sat at the end of a long, curved driveway, flanked by manicured hedges and pillars that screamed legacy. It wasn't a home. It was a declaration. Every window lit with warm amber lighting, every brick arranged like it had signed an NDA. We pulled up to the valet station in Dawn's car. The young man opened the passenger door and smiled, eyes flicking past me like I wasn't there. No number ticket offered, no Miss Cross greeting, just a nod in Dawn's direction and a wave for the next car. I stepped out, adjusting my coat, noting how the evening air smelled of lavender and old money. The front entrance glistened under hanging lanterns, and inside, the sound of glassware clinking carried through the halls like a rehearsed melody. This wasn't just a dinner, it was a staging. Inside, a woman I didn't recognize greeted us with the kind of smile that made your skin itch. Too broad, too polished. "You must be Dawn," she said warmly, then turned her attention to me with a pause. "And you must be?" I gave her a handshake and a polite nod. "Talia, pleasure to meet you." She nodded without writing my name down. That said everything. We moved through the foyer and into the main hall, where the dinner table stretched like a runway. Long, lavish, unwelcoming. Dozens of place settings lined it, each with ornate calligraphy name cards in front of gold-rimmed plates. Champagne already chilled, centerpieces perfectly spaced. Nothing was left to chance. Except my seat. I stood there for a second, scanning the names. There was Dawn, Elaine, board members, family friends, even the niece I'd only met once at a fundraiser. No Talia. Not even a blank card waiting to be filled. Dawn noticed but said nothing. Her hand rested lightly on my back, guiding me toward a chair next to hers. "Just sit here," she whispered, as if offering me a favor. I sat, slowly, every movement deliberate, as if occupying space too quickly would be inappropriate. A staff member passed by, paused at my setting, looked slightly confused, then walked on. No one offered to fix it. No one acknowledged it aloud. Elaine breezed in, all pearls and posture. Her voice carried even when she wasn't trying. "Oh, we had to adjust seating last minute. I assumed she'd be next to Dawn anyway." Light chuckle. A few heads nodded. Mine didn't. I took a breath, folded the napkin across my lap, and reminded myself, stay poised. You don't need a name card to be seen. But the truth is, this wasn't a mistake. It was the softest form of erasure, one that leaves no bruises but still manages to ache. Dinner began with the usual performances. Small talk that felt rehearsed, wine poured in intervals, conversations floating around me like I wasn't expected to catch them. The woman across from me leaned in, glass in hand. "So what brings you to this level of the industry?" she asked with a smile that bordered on dissection. "This level?" I echoed. "You're in tech, right? Like apps?" I kept my voice steady. "I run a technology firm that develops education-focused AI platforms." "Oh, how fun," she replied, tone laced with a kind of syrupy dismissiveness. "Dawn always picks the most ambitious people. It's charming." I gave her a nod. Charming is one word for it. Throughout dinner, the questions came like darts wrapped in tulle. What's it like being self-made? Do you find it hard to navigate corporate culture? Dawn said you were raised in, what was it, group homes? Each one smiled as they asked, like they were offering me compliments, and each time I responded with grace that belied the fire in my chest. Because that's the trick. They don't expect you to recognize a slight when it's wrapped in civility. I reached for my water glass, pausing just long enough to hear a guest whisper, "At least she's quiet." I smiled into my drink. You'll learn that quiet doesn't mean unaware. Then came the kicker. Elaine had a known fondness for Japanese whiskeys. So earlier that week, I'd sourced a bottle that wasn't just rare. It was meaningful. It had a history. I'd had it custom wrapped, included a handwritten card thanking her for finally inviting me into her space. Midway through the evening, a board member lifted his glass and said, "This whiskey is divine. Dawn, you always bring the best." My head turned. Elaine beamed. "Isn't she thoughtful?" Dawn glanced at me, said nothing. I didn't blink. I didn't correct. I sat still, letting the moment settle. My fingers brushed the fabric of my napkin, now slightly damp from condensation. My gift, rebranded, reassigned. They think erasing me is subtle. It's not. It's slow violence in pearls and porcelain. I considered leaving. Every part of me itched to rise, push back my chair, and vanish into the night. But I didn't. Not because I was afraid, because I was watching. I've sat through worse. Not for them, for what comes after. I stayed because history only remembers the ones who didn't flinch. And I've learned how to fold my rage into silence, sharpen it, and place it in my pocket like a blade. Just as dessert was served, and the lighting dimmed to that golden hue that flatters everyone but reveals nothing, a man stood up, tapping his glass with a spoon. "A toast," he began, voice hearty, "to the Elaine Group's future, and to the woman behind its next partnership. Dawn." Applause. Dawn blushed. Elaine looked pleased. The guests raised their glasses in unison, and I smiled. My hand didn't shake, but my grip on the fork tightened just enough to feel the pressure in my palm. The transition from the dining room to the parlor happened with a grace that only old money could choreograph. A gentle suggestion from a butler, a quiet ushering toward a room already glowing with amber light, brandy waiting on trays, and jazz humming softly from a speaker no one could see. I walked a few steps behind Dawn, who was smiling at something a guest whispered in her ear. I didn't ask what it was. Elaine's assistant passed me as if surprised I was still present, her brow lifting a fraction before she offered a tight, rehearsed smile. I returned it, just as shallow. This part of the evening, I realized, wasn't about entertainment, it was about reinforcement. Here, in this curated corner of the house, reputations were cemented with laughter, legacy built with handshakes under soft lighting. No deals were signed here, but every future deal was born in rooms like this. I kept to Dawn's side for a few minutes before drifting near a side table that drew my attention. It was arranged like a shrine, frames in varying shades of gold and ivory lined up meticulously. Graduation ceremonies, black tie galas, baby showers, anniversary trips. Elaine's home wasn't just a display of power. It was a museum of selected memory. I scanned the table slowly. I wasn't in a single photo. 3 years. 3 years of shared milestones, professional wins, birthdays, and holidays, but not one image. My gaze fell on a familiar photo, a tech conference gala in San Diego. I remembered the night well. I was the keynote speaker. I'd stood on stage for 20 minutes, explaining the intersection between education reform and artificial intelligence. The applause had lasted longer than expected. But the photo here showed only Elaine and Dawn at the venue entrance, smiles perfectly in sync, the caption reading, "Elaine and Dawn at Tech Gala, Summer." I had been in the original shot. I remembered the flash, the position, the photographer's angle. I had stood between them, not beside. Between. They had cropped me out. Sometimes, I whispered under my breath, erasure is louder than insults. Someone had to open that file, zoom in, trim the edges, and approve the print. It wasn't a mistake. It was intent wrapped in subtlety, a decision hidden behind gold leaf frames. "Everything okay?" Dawn's voice broke my trance. I straightened. "Lovely arrangement," I said, nodding toward the wall of curated remembrance. She looked, followed my gaze. "Oh, Mom always chooses the photos. She likes things to look a certain way." "Does that way ever include me?" I asked. There was a pause, not hesitation, a choice. "She didn't mean anything by it," Dawn said. "It's just visual continuity." I looked at her and felt the distance solidify. She wasn't defending Elaine anymore. She was participating. "You see that, right?" I said, my voice calm. "You see I'm not here. I'm not in your family's pictures. I'm not in the seating chart. I'm not even in the gift tag for the whiskey I brought." Dawn said nothing. She didn't look angry, just still. That kind of stillness is its own confession. I turned away before she could offer more of the same apologies, the kind that reeked of conditioning. Across the room, laughter rose in a group near the fireplace. I watched as they leaned into each other, speaking in half-whispers, polished fingers tapping their glasses, exchanging industry gossip and vacation plans. They belonged. I didn't. I walked to a window and stared out at the garden lit with subtle floodlights. The same garden where, earlier that year, I had helped Dawn draft her pitch deck. Elaine had hosted an investor brunch on that lawn, and I'd watched from the kitchen, unacknowledged, because the house was too full that day. I remembered a foster home I lived in at 15. There was a rule about wall space. Only biological family photos could go up in the hallway. The rest of us had drawers. If you wanted to be seen, you opened your own drawer, alone. My breath slowed. I wasn't crying. I wasn't breaking. I was preparing. I turned from the window just as Elaine approached, an older gentleman by her side. She wore that smile again, sharp enough to leave a mark if you weren't careful. "This is Peter Langston," she said. "He's on the board of the Education Fund. Dawn will be collaborating with him on the upcoming initiative." Peter offered a hand. I shook it politely. Elaine gestured vaguely in my direction. "She's around. No name, no title, no relation." Peter waited for clarification. I gave it. "I'm not around," I said, my voice calm, clear. "I'm the one who made that future possible." Elaine blinked. Peter glanced between us. "Well," he said awkwardly, "you must be the brains behind the curtain then." I smiled. "I've been called worse." I walked away before Elaine could summon another polished phrase to cover the crack. Her gaze followed me, but she said nothing. Good. The room changed after dessert, not in sound or color, but in temperature. The kind of shift only people who'd grown up in rooms like that could detect. The kind of air that thickens with expectation. Guests migrated toward the parlor and fireside chairs, forming cliques as naturally as oil separates from water. Elaine's staff, always 2 steps ahead, repositioned glasses, refreshed charcuterie trays, and added logs to the fireplace with a precision I could never mimic. I stayed close to Dawn, more out of habit than comfort. She wasn't holding my hand anymore. Her body leaned toward another conversation before her feet even shifted. A man she'd met once in Paris, now on his 4th startup, was pitching something with blockchain in every other sentence. She laughed, easy, fluid, like she belonged. I stood there, unanchored, a guest among insiders. The smell of aged leather, expensive cologne, and decades of legacy whispered from the walls. Everything about the space screamed selective access, not exclusion by force, but by culture, by unspoken rules. Elaine floated over, eyes gleaming, a glass of something amber in her hand. "Peter," she called, touching a woman's elbow gently. "I'd like you to meet Dawn. She's leading our digital outreach. She's been instrumental in shaping our next strategic pivot." The woman, elegant and manicured, turned toward me next with a smile that looked like it had been painted on. Elaine paused, just long enough to register. "And this is," she gestured vaguely, "Dawn's companion. She's been helping on the admin side." Not my name, not my title, not even a syllable I could use to reclaim myself. The woman nodded graciously. "It's lovely. It's nice to give young women something productive to do, especially these days. Everyone needs a start." I blinked. Elaine sipped her drink. Dawn didn't say a word. I didn't either. But inside, something snapped, not loud, not breaking, but like a thread pulled too tight for too long. I thought about Maya Angelou's words. When someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. Elaine hadn't just shown me tonight. She'd painted it in oil and hung it in her house. Later, near the hallway by the coat room, I stopped Dawn with a light touch on her wrist. "You heard that, right?" Dawn looked startled. "Heard what?" "Elaine. The way she introduced me." Dawn hesitated. "I didn't want to make a scene. It wasn't the time." "It's never the time," I replied. "You didn't want to make a scene? Or you didn't want to make her uncomfortable?" Her silence was an answer. She adjusted the strap on her dress. "This is a big night for her, Talia." "And what am I?" I asked. "Collateral for a big night?" Dawn looked away. It didn't hurt the way it used to. The pain wasn't sharp anymore. It was cold. Familiar. Like a bruise you've stopped checking. "You know," I said softly, "silence is a choice too." She looked back at me, eyes glassy but defiant. "You think I wanted this? That I like choosing sides?" "No," I whispered. "But you did it anyway. That's where love goes to die. Not with screaming, not with betrayal, but in a hallway, next to coats that aren't yours, with someone who can't even say your name. We walked back into the room together, but we weren't together anymore. A new guest had arrived, someone from a tech foundation. Elaine glided over, her voice cheerful. "This is Dawn," she said brightly. "She's the future of the family legacy. We're so proud of what she's building." I stood beside Dawn, waiting. This was her moment, her chance to include me, to even say, "This is Talia, my partner." She said nothing. The man smiled politely, turned back to Elaine. I stepped back quietly and excused myself to the powder room. The walls were floral, the lighting too warm. I stared at my reflection. My face didn't look sad. It looked resolved. I remembered something my mentor once told me, back when I was fresh out of grad school and had just lost my first investment round. "Sometimes silence is a kindness," she'd said. "But most times, it's a weapon." Tonight, it was both. I adjusted my hair, reapplied my lipstick, and exhaled slowly. I didn't plan to leave, not yet. But I would never walk into a room with my head tilted again. Not for them. When I stepped back into the hall, one of Elaine's assistants passed behind me, speaking low into a headset. "We'll make sure she's not too visible in the press shots." I didn't flinch. I just reached for my phone. When I stepped back into the dining room, the scene had shifted into something looser, more casual, but no less calculated. The wine had done its job, shoulders were slouched, laughter ran a little louder, and the jazz had melted into something smoother in the background. It would have felt cozy if the air wasn't charged with the tension of selective inclusion. Elaine was holding court at the head of the table, surrounded by her trusted few. I scanned the room, looking for Dawn. She was seated with a small group of younger guests, leaned in close to a man I didn't recognize, her hand resting on the stem of her glass like she'd been born in that posture. I returned to my seat beside her, slowly. She didn't acknowledge me right away. A guest across the table leaned forward with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You've done well for yourself," he said, "coming from modest beginnings." I barely had time to respond before Elaine interjected, her voice smooth and sweet like a velvet knife. "Oh yes," she said, laughing lightly. "Talia's what I call a true modern success story, straight out of the sewer, polished with ambition." There it was. A few guests chuckled, perhaps not quite catching the edge, or pretending not to. I watched Dawn's fingers tighten around her glass, but her face stayed neutral. I didn't react immediately. I sat, still and composed, hearing the word echo in my mind like it had bounced off every wall in the room. Sewer, sewer trash, polished, but still from the sewer. I looked around. No one stopped chewing. No one protested. The room hummed on, like I hadn't just been publicly reduced to refuse in pearls. I folded my napkin back into place. My hand was steady. Inside, I was somewhere else entirely. Somewhere colder. Watching myself from a distance. Detached. I didn't wait for a follow-up. I leaned back and, without breaking eye contact with Elaine, replied, "Well, I suppose garbage gets repurposed better than rusted silver." A pause. A sharp inhale from someone 2 seats down. Elaine's smile froze. "If you're feeling so reactive, maybe a break is best," she said. "We can handle dinner." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. She just looked at the butler, who understood without a word. A few guests glanced at each other, unsure whether to continue eating or wait to see how the scene would unfold. One man cleared his throat and mumbled something about the main course being late. The butler stepped toward me. "Ms. Cross, perhaps you'd be more comfortable in the study for a few minutes?" I stood. I didn't cause a scene. I didn't raise my voice or toss a glass across the room like some dramatic soap opera heroine. I smoothed the fabric of my dress and smiled, tight and sharp. "No need to worry," I said. "I know when I'm no longer part of the guest list." As I walked out, the only sound behind me was the clinking of forks against plates. Business resumed. Laughter crept back in. A polite exile. The hallway was quiet, the lighting dimmer. I walked slowly, heels tapping softly against the polished floor. I passed the same art collection I'd once complimented, portraits of founders, of family, of influence. I didn't look at them this time. They weren't meant for me. At a corner mirror, I stopped, looked at myself. My reflection didn't seem hurt. It looked focused. There was a steeliness in my gaze I hadn't seen in years. I whispered to myself, "You have no idea what I built, but you will." Eleanor Roosevelt once said, "No one can make you feel inferior without your consent." Tonight, I revoked mine. When I reached the entrance, the valet who'd ignored me earlier now stood straighter, uncertain. "Is your ride ready, ma'am?" "My driver's waiting," I said. He didn't ask why I was leaving early. People like him knew better than to touch the raw edges of their employer's designs. Outside, the evening had cooled. The air was sharper, clearer. I found my car easily, my driver already standing by the open door, brows knit. "You leaving already?" he asked. I stepped in. "No," I said. "I'm just no longer where I was supposed to be." He nodded once, understanding more than I expected. As we pulled away, I scrolled past the missed calls from earlier in the day, the polite RSVP confirmations, the irrelevant pitches. Then I opened a secure folder, typed in my credentials, and accessed a direct line to my team. I drafted one sentence: "Prepare exit from Elaine Group pending my call." The email sat there for a beat before I hit save. Not send, not yet. The wheels turned underneath me. The world passed in blur outside. But in my mind, every brick of that house I'd just left was being disassembled and reassembled in the shape of consequence. Back inside, through a tall window, the butler watched the taillights disappear down the drive. He turned, pulled out his phone, and made a call. Short, quiet, efficient. In the dining room, Elaine lifted her glass and smiled. The click of the door behind me echoed like a gavel. Not loud, but final. Every step I took away from the dining room felt like I was walking off a stage I was never meant to be on. And yet, I'd stood there longer than anyone expected. Not for applause, but to observe, to collect. I was led by a discreet staff member, same tailored uniform, same neutral expression, down a side hallway. The air cooled quickly. The hum of laughter and silverware faded behind us. He opened a door without a word and gestured me in. I gave a small nod, walked past him, and entered the room where forgotten guests were politely exiled. It was cold, not in temperature, but in design. Pale walls, beige carpeting, one large window covered by thick drapes. The couch looked like it had been ordered from a catalog titled Hotel Lobbies, 2007. On a side table sat a tray of untouched water and crackers, like someone had tried to offer comfort without meaning it. A glass of wine was already poured, perfectly chilled, sitting under a paper doily. I didn't sit. I crossed my arms, letting the silence settle. Then I let my eyes wander, not with panic or curiosity, but with evaluation. This wasn't a room for reflection. It was a holding pen, just sterile enough to feel polite, just impersonal enough to remind you, you weren't supposed to be here. I looked at the wine, then back at the couch. This room, I murmured to myself, was made for people like me. Not to stay, just to disappear. I didn't feel hurt. I felt calibrated. Like my body was processing the insult, but my mind was already rewriting the code. It wasn't the first time I'd been sidelined. As a girl in the system, I learned to recognize the quiet corners where people were placed when their presence was inconvenient. Rooms like this existed in every form: back row at assemblies, guest bedrooms with no sheets, business meetings where your name was spelled wrong in the deck. I pulled out my phone, not to scroll, not to vent, but to speak. I opened my voice memo app and hit record. It's how I think when I'm boiling. Words come better when they're spoken first, written later. They called me sewer trash, I said aloud, softly. Dawn said nothing. Elaine smiled while doing it. Then I was removed from the table, not by force, but by suggestion. That's data. I paused, swallowed the burn. They created the perception, then enforced the role. This isn't personal, it's tactical. And now, I'll respond in kind. I tapped the stop button, saved the file under a folder marked Post-Dinner Moves. A knock on the door broke the moment. The server from earlier, a young man, maybe 19, thin build, still learning to balance the tray in his hands, entered silently. He placed a folded napkin beside the untouched wine, offered a brief nod, and turned to go. I didn't say a word. Only when the door clicked shut again did I reach for it. The napkin was stiff. Tucked inside was a small note, handwritten in slanted, uneven script. They shouldn't have treated you that way. Not everyone here agrees with her. I read it twice. The ink looked fresh, the hand unsure. But the message hit harder than anything Elaine had said tonight. Because it wasn't from someone who owed me anything. It was from someone who saw something and couldn't sit with it. Even in exile, witnesses exist. I folded the note carefully, placed it into my clutch. Not for keepsake, for record. Then I took out my second phone, the one linked to my analyst. Encrypted. Discreet. My fingers moved without hesitation. Audit Elaine Group's non-compete clause, flagged on. Not out of pettiness, out of strategy. They'd drawn lines tonight. I was just choosing where I'd draw mine. I caught my reflection in the glass again. This time, there was no hesitation. No searching for a reason. My face wasn't broken. It was sharpened. Still standing. I stepped out of the room slowly, each heel click a metronome of intent. As I passed the corridor leading back to the dining hall, I heard laughter. Clear, bright, deliberate. The kind of laughter that signaled victory or arrogance. They thought I was out of the room, but I was already in the next one. This, I whispered to the hallway, is the last door you'll ever get to close on me. The car door closed with a hush that felt like punctuation, not an ending, just a shift in tone. I slid into the back seat, not bothering to adjust the hem of my dress. My driver glanced up through the mirror. "Ma'am, you sure you don't want to wait for dawn?" I looked at him, then out the window toward the glowing estate. The windows glittered like eyes watching. "No, I think she's already chosen who she's waiting with." He didn't ask anything more. That's why I kept him. As the car pulled away from the estate's circular drive, I reached beside me. There it was, tucked under the gala program, forgotten by whoever had arranged the evening. A printed agenda, discreetly folded. I pulled it out and smoothed it across my lap. At the bottom, in elegant font, Strategic Partnership Gala, hosted by Elaine Group. Not dinner to welcome Talia. Not private family celebration. No, this wasn't a gathering, it was a rollout. I had walked into a pressable moment without realizing it. I'd been background, endorsement, just enough presence to validate the event, and completely invisible at the same time. As we exited the gates, I leaned back into the seat, allowing my mind to rewind the night. I recalled a conversation between two board members while I waited in line for the powder room. "They're going to roll this into phase 2 next quarter if the VC bites," one had said. The other nodded, replying, "Between the app acquisition and the global learning arm, they've got it locked." And earlier, by the bar, another snippet. "Once Langston backs out, Elaine Group gets the lane to itself." That's when it clicked. This wasn't about me being there to be introduced to family. It was about me being there so they could finalize a pitch. My face, my reputation, my association. They needed the public alignment to court credibility, and they used me like a decorative certificate on a wall. They didn't just want me silent, I said to no one. They wanted my name without the mouth attached. I took a breath, opened my secure tablet, navigated to the encrypted line that connected me directly to Crossbridge Equity's legal team. My finger hovered for only a second before I hit call. It rang twice. "Ms. Cross?" The voice came through, sharp, alert. "Everything all right?" "Clause 14B, I said. "Cultural incompatibility. Initiate full withdrawal." There was a pause. "We're scheduled to finalize Monday. Do you want to delay until after Jimshwaim?" She called me sewer trash, I interrupted. In front of the very people they're trying to pitch. Another pause, then a quiet, "Understood." The line went silent as they moved. No small talk, no apology. We'd prepared for this contingency the moment the deal was on the table. We always prepare for exits. I closed the tablet. Outside, the highway stretched in long, fluid lines of passing headlights. I let myself settle into the movement, the rhythm of leaving. I remembered being 26, the first time I pulled out of a merger at the last minute. They underestimated me because I wore a pantsuit from Target and brought notes in a paper folder. But I'd still outbought their board. It wasn't that the win felt good, it felt quiet, like slipping a card across a table and watching someone fold. Tonight felt like that again. They'd written a script. I'd rewritten the ending. My phone buzzed. Dawn, missed call, then another, then 6 more, 8 total. I stared at the screen. My thumb hovered. Then I set the phone down, screen side down. This wasn't silence out of avoidance. It was the sound of consequence. I reached for my memo app, typed 2 lines. The first, Elaine Group, exit triggered. Notify comms team in 6 hours. The second was simpler. She thought I left quietly. That's what makes it hurt more when I don't come back. But that wasn't for anyone else to read. That one stayed in the drafts. I looked out again as the city started to reappear. Hints of skyline, familiar signs, the hum of life outside, curated invitations, and manufactured intimacy. At a red light, I opened my email. Drafted a new message. Subject, withdrawal of strategic funding. Elaine Group. I didn't hit send. Yet, I let it breathe on the screen, just like I had let them think I was done. But I wasn't finished, because while I wasn't invited to their table, I still owned the building. The video played on a loop. Elaine, crystal glass in hand, standing at the head of the table like a benevolent monarch, her voice full of theatrical warmth. To Dawn, our future of integrity. Applause followed. Then came the moment she leaned ever so slightly toward the nearest guest, just loud enough for the microphone on someone's phone to catch it. And to think, some people crawled out of the sewer and think they belong at this table. The video cut there, but the damage was complete. No need for context, no need for clarifications. I didn't film it, I didn't leak it. But someone did, and whoever they were, they captured it perfectly. The smirk, the tilt of her head, the casual cruelty that rolled off her tongue like a closing signature. I didn't smile because I orchestrated it. I smiled because Elaine had written her own ending, and now she had to read it aloud in front of the world. The night flashed through my mind again, brief snippets. The glint of silver under chandelier light, the way guests leaned in and out of each other's spaces like they were choreographed. The toast, I had thought then, wasn't meant for me. I had underestimated just how much it wasn't. I had been a prop, a backdrop, a checkmark in the diversity column of their story. And now the story had broken loose. My phone buzzed non-stop on the nightstand. Screenshots, shares, texts from journalists, quiet, you okay? Messages from people I hadn't heard from in months. Every headline screamed the same thing. Sewer Trashgate, the video that shattered Elaine Group. I didn't respond to anyone. I didn't have to. Because silence can be its own broadcast. The louder they laughed, the harder the echo hits. Elaine's PR team reacted exactly how I expected. A 3-paragraph statement by mid-morning posted to LinkedIn and PR Wire. This was taken out of context, they insisted. Elaine's words were misunderstood. A masterclass in gaslighting, dressed in Times New Roman. Dawn texted me. Of course she did. Please don't add fuel. Let us fix this. I stared at her message for a while before replying. I didn't start the fire. I just left the matches where you could see them. At 10:42 a.m., I received confirmation from Crossbridge. Funding withdrawn, clauses 14B and 15A invoked. Your formal release will be made public at 2 p.m. EST. By 11:15, the Financial Herald ran the headline, Crossbridge cuts ties with Elaine Group amid viral scandal. And that was before the real earthquake hit. It wasn't a CEO. It wasn't an investor. It was a 10-year-old girl. A TikTok video, barely 20 seconds long, shaky and vertical, but loud and clear. Grandma said the girl with the long braids wasn't family. She's just here for show. The caption read, Oops. Grandma said I shouldn't say that out loud. Within an hour, the video hit 6 million views. I watched it twice, then again. It was funny in a way. Not because of what the child said, but because it confirmed everything without meaning to. The House of Whispers had finally shouted. I didn't cry. I didn't laugh either. I sat on the edge of my bed and muttered to no one. It wasn't just a toxic woman. It was a culture. And culture is always harder to burn down. But this time, it was their own words doing the igniting. By afternoon, my assistant forwarded an internal leak. Elaine Group's board had scheduled an emergency meeting. Without her, the email used carefully rehearsed language. We believe a temporary recusal from strategic decisions may be best to preserve brand integrity. Translation: she was being pushed out. Another text from Dawn. This one was shorter. Please don't let this ruin everything. I didn't reply immediately. When I finally did, I simply said, this is me letting go, not out of mercy, out of mastery. She didn't respond. I stood by the window in my penthouse later that evening, the city alive below. Manhattan glittered like it didn't know or care what name was trending today. But I cared, not because I needed the validation, but because I knew the next time someone tried to erase me, they'd think twice. My phone buzzed again. A message from my assistant. Elaine just stepped down. Statement goes public in an hour. I took a long sip of my coffee and watched the headlines refresh. So much for keeping me out of the picture. By the time I opened my eyes, Elaine Group's downfall had already made the headlines. I didn't need a TV. I didn't need an alert. The moment I reached for my phone and saw over 60 unread notifications, I knew. The kind of knowing that doesn't come with adrenaline, but with confirmation. A quiet, grounded weight. The top stories painted the picture clear. Elaine Group faces investor exodus after gala scandal. Board restructuring imminent. From toast to tarnished, when class warfare goes viral. My inbox overflowed with interview requests, brand partnerships, invitation-only podcasts. A few anonymous congratulations snuck in, too. You did what no one else had the spine to do. But I didn't reply. I didn't even crack a smile. I sat at the counter in my kitchen, stirred honey into my tea, and listened to the faint tick of the wall clock. You don't have to bury them, I said aloud, quoting an old mentor's favorite line. Just show people the shovel they were holding. To some, this might have looked like vindication. But I wasn't looking for that. I was looking for proof. Proof that you could fight back without becoming ugly. Proof that silence, when placed carefully, could be sharper than a shout. Around 10:15 a.m., my doorman buzzed. Certified delivery, Ms. Cross, legal courier. I opened the envelope slowly, expecting the usual legalese. But what was inside wasn't a lawsuit. It was an apology. Or at least, their version of one. Dear Ms. Cross, it began. On behalf of Elaine Group and its leadership, we express our regret regarding any discomfort or misinterpretation of recent events. Elaine is prepared to issue a public statement acknowledging your contributions and offering a gesture of inclusion, should you agree to refrain from further public commentary or engagement on the matter. I read it twice. Then a third time, it wasn't an apology, it was a silencing tactic, a trade. My voice for their version of grace. I reached for a pen and underlined one word, graciously. Then I flipped the page over, wrote a single sentence, and handed it to my assistant, reply with my silence. At noon, Dawn called again. The first few seconds were just breathing on the line, then a quiet, she doesn't mean it, not really, she's scared. I leaned against the window. So was I said. And you let her make me feel small in front of a room full of men who would one day need my funding. She didn't defend herself this time. She didn't try to pivot. I'm sorry, she said, voice cracking. Not because of what happened, because I didn't stop it. I know. There was a beat of silence. She whispered, Does it matter now? I didn't hang up. I didn't curse. I just let the line run cold until she understood the answer on her own. Minutes later, another notification popped up, this time from my intellectual property attorney. Urgent! Elaine Group filed derivative patent last night. Submission time-stamped 2:14 a.m. Derivative of your original learning algorithm. I forwarded it to my internal legal team. No emotion, no outrage. Pursue damages, quietly, but thoroughly. Because this wasn't just personal anymore. This was theft. Attempted erasure through paperwork. And I'd seen this game before, long before I wore heels that cost more than a week's rent. This wasn't war in the boardroom. It was a war of systems, code, copyrights, quiet decisions made at 2 a.m. when they thought no one was watching. I watched. I always do. By late afternoon, I sat at my desk drafting a formal disassociation notice. I didn't name Elaine. I didn't need to. Effective immediately, we are no longer aligned with entities whose values conflict with long-term educational equity and ethical leadership. It was clean, professional, lethal. I read it aloud once, checked the spacing, and closed the draft. I don't destroy people. I destroy narratives. At sunset, my assistant entered the room. Elaine's lawyers reached out. I looked up. They want a closed-door settlement, NDA included. They're hoping you'll just walk away quietly. I folded the letter from that morning, slid it across the desk. Tell them quiet was never the goal, I said. Just justice. 2 days after Elaine stepped down, the world outside was quieter, but the storm behind the curtains was only just beginning. My legal team sent over the internal chatter from Elaine Group's board. The official language was all voluntary transition, repositioning of leadership, and strategic rebranding. But between the lines, it was chaos. Legacy backers pulling funds, advisors resigning in clusters. Projects halted. Contractors demanding reevaluation. They weren't just losing money, they were hemorrhaging identity. The same executives who once smirked at me from across boardroom tables were now scrambling to ensure their names weren't printed on the sinking ship. And I didn't say a word. Not to the press, not to Dawn, not to Elaine. My silence had become a brand. The woman they tried to erase owned the floor beneath them, one headline read. Another, Talia Cross, the power play we didn't see coming. I didn't respond to interview requests. I didn't accept speaking invitations. I declined every offer to tell my side. Because this wasn't about proving anything anymore. This was about watching the truth do what it does best, reveal itself without my permission. And while they scrambled for the floor, I was sitting on the roof. 6 months before the gala, I'd made a move that was equal parts insurance and instinct. I acquired a controlling stake in Langston Tech, Elaine Group's primary competitor in the education tech space. I did it through a quiet network of intermediaries, layered and clean. The paperwork never touched my name directly until now. Langston Tech's growth had been slow but steady, underfunded, undermarketed, but brilliant in structure. And now, with Elaine Group bleeding and I holding the reins of its rival, the shift was seismic. I didn't need a press release. I just attended a Langston Tech board call as a strategic advisor. My presence alone did the work. Their stock surged within 48 hours. I called it karma. My attorney called it timing. Later that afternoon, she walked into my office holding a familiar manila envelope. "There's more," she said, dropping it on the desk. "They tried to file a patent adjustment, using your name." I raised an eyebrow. "Forgery?" "Blatant. It's not even close to your signature." Time-stamped the night the video went viral. I flipped open the file. The scanned copy looked rushed, crooked scan lines, shaky ink. Desperation makes people sloppy. I let out a dry laugh. "You'd think if they were going to steal from me, they'd at least trace it better." She waited. "File the criminal complaint," I said, voice even, quietly, no press yet. Because this wasn't just about public shaming anymore. This was legal. This was federal. And now they weren't just elitist. They were criminally reckless. The forgery was traced directly to Elaine's personal legal aid, metadata, IP address, internal server logs. Elaine tried to spin it, of course. A rogue employee. Unapproved error. We are deeply investigating. But the data didn't lie. Neither did the leak. I made sure the full documentation went to one outlet in particular, the one that refused to profile me last year when I was named in Forbes' Top Women in AI. Back then, they said my background was too unfamiliar for their readership. Now, their homepage plastered the headline, "The Outsider Who Rewrote the Rules, From Sewer Trash to Strategic Titan." I sat in my penthouse, coffee in hand, while the world turned upside down. And not once did I have to raise my voice. In a brief call with my lawyer, I confirmed we were moving forward on all charges. She asked if I wanted to settle quietly. I didn't even entertain the idea. "This isn't revenge," I told her. "It's repair, and I'm not done rebuilding." She nodded. Understood. That evening, I sat at my desk with no music playing, no emails open. Just space. Just stillness. The kind of stillness that used to feel like loneliness, but now felt like ownership. Until a knock interrupted it. My assistant stepped in, hesitant. "This came by courier. No return address." She handed me a small envelope, handwritten, unbranded. I opened it slowly, expecting maybe another attempt at an NDA, maybe a backdoor apology. Inside, a single sheet, no signature. You might have won the boardroom, but family doesn't forget. I stared at the line for a moment, then looked out the window where the city was still buzzing, lights flickering like thoughts in motion. "Good," I whispered. "Neither do I." There's a strange kind of quiet that follows public destruction. It doesn't arrive with sirens or smoke. It arrives with stillness, the kind that settles in your chest when no one's calling, no one's cornering you, and no one's asking for a quote. That's where I was, 1 week after the last press cycle had exhausted itself. I wasn't trending anymore, but my name didn't need to be. The industry had already shifted. People moved carefully around me now, not out of fear, but caution. Like I had become a mirror too clear for their liking. I sat alone in my home office, a stack of unsigned contracts on one side, a steaming mug of tea on the other. My inbox was quieter now, but the curiosity lingered. I could feel it in the pauses during conference calls, in the hesitant phrasing from executives who used to correct me mid-sentence. They weren't sure if I would speak, or if I already had. I didn't chase vindication. I had no interest in dragging anyone further. I just wanted to work again. Build something that wasn't reactionary, something that wasn't survival. Because this silence wasn't rejection, it was reclamation. Sometimes peace is louder than applause. 3 days ago, I received a letter from Dawn. Not an email, not a forwarded statement from legal, just a letter, handwritten, no corporate header, no signature block. The envelope was soft. The ink slightly smudged in places, like her hand had hesitated as she wrote. I read it once, then again. "I didn't protect you," it began. "I protected a version of my family I knew was broken." She admitted things, not with excuses, but clarity, that she had made choices based on fear, that loyalty had blurred with preservation, that she didn't expect forgiveness. "I'm not asking to return," the letter ended. "I'm asking if you ever felt I saw you." I folded it gently, placed it inside my drawer, not because it hurt, but because it didn't. I hadn't lost her. I had released her, and for the first time in a long while, I understood the difference. The next afternoon, I met an old friend for coffee. Not a business lunch, not a meeting masked as catch-up, just coffee, just warmth. He had known me back when I shared apartments with 4 roommates and rode the subway at 5 a.m. just to get to my internship on time. He looked at me across the table and said, "You didn't beat them, Talia. You outgrew them." I laughed. I think I got so caught up proving I belonged that I forgot I already did. He nodded. It's easy to chase recognition when you've been erased, but sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stop asking to be seen. That stayed with me. Later that evening, back in my penthouse, I opened the keepsake box in the corner of my bookshelf. Inside was the folded napkin from the gala, the one slipped to me by the young server when no one else said a word. I unfolded it carefully. The handwriting was simple. "They shouldn't have treated you that way." I didn't know his name. I never found him afterward. But his words had landed deeper than any public apology, because they were simple, honest, unscripted. Sometimes, strangers offer more honesty than those who say they love us. I placed the napkin into a small frame and set it on the corner of my desk. Not for display, not for dramatics, just to remind myself, when the lights go out and the applause fades, who I am when no one's watching. The next morning, I finalized my next round of funding. Not with legacy firms, not with polished names from old families, but with founders who had grit under their nails and ideas no one had taken seriously yet. First-gen builders, women who weren't asked to speak, but who showed up anyway. I backed them all. And when my assistant slid another envelope across my desk, an NDA from Elaine's remaining legal team, I didn't even open it. I deleted the email, shredded the paper. I didn't need their silence, and I didn't need mine. Power isn't in making them remember your name, it's in being okay when they don't. That evening, I took a walk through Central Park. The sun dipped low, casting soft gold across the paths. I walked without music, without distraction, just myself, the trees, and the rhythm of a life no longer tied to proving anything. My phone buzzed. I answered. "Talia Cross?" the voice asked. "This is Jennifer Owens from the Journal. Now that Elaine's story is over, would you like to go on record?" I smiled. Not bitter, not smug, just full. "Elaine's story is over," I replied. Mine just stopped mentioning her. The morning was crisp, the sky the color of silvered steel, and the city unusually still, as if it sensed that something was about to shift. I walked into the boardroom with purpose, heels silent against the polished concrete. No hesitation, no performance, just execution. Langston Tech's leadership team stood when I entered, not out of ceremony, but recognition. The news ticker on the wall scrolled the headline I'd waited years to see. Elaine Group dissolved, merged under Langston Tech umbrella. They said the market was stunned. They said no one expected it to fall this far this fast. But I did. I knew exactly how long it would take a paper kingdom to crumble when no one at the top thought it could. I'd counted the bricks, one by one, the night they pushed me out of the dining room. The air in the boardroom was tense, but not panicked. People knew today was historic. Not loud, not dramatic, just final. They underestimated the woman they tried to uninvite, I said softly, taking my seat at the head of the table. We began. An hour into the proceedings, my legal counsel slid a document toward me. I read it without blinking. This was the clause, the one that would permanently bar Elaine Harrington from ever holding an executive position, sitting on a board, or even speaking publicly on behalf of any entity tied to education or equity initiatives. Elaine had begged her board to remove it. She'd pleaded with her allies behind closed doors. I didn't flinch. Keep it, I said. She taught me what exclusion feels like. Now let's see how she handles it. There was no applause, no murmured agreement, just silence, heavy, complete, affirming. Later that afternoon, while prepping for my keynote at the Women in Innovation Summit, a courier delivered a letter. No return address. Her handwriting. I didn't open it immediately. I waited until I was alone, the room dim, the echo of the city just beyond the window. Then I unfolded it. "You destroyed my life," it began. "You were nothing until my son brought you into my world, and look what you've done with it." There was no apology, just venom dressed in indignation. I paused at that one line. "You were nothing," then folded the letter, slid it through the shredder beside the desk, and moved on, not because I was unaffected, but because I was uninterested. My reply would be public and precise. I stepped onto the stage later that evening beneath soft lighting, my name announced without any qualifiers. No guest, no partner, no +1, just Talia Cross, founder, visionary, strategist. I spoke about silencing, about coded erasure, about the cost of sitting quietly while others define your narrative. Power, I said, isn't inherited, it's created, and sometimes, when the system tries to gatekeep, you don't knock. You build the house next door. I thanked those who doubted me. Because you taught me how to survive rejection so well, I built my success to withstand it. The room rose, a standing ovation, not because I'd won, but because I'd stayed whole. The next morning, in a downtown Manhattan law office, I signed the final merger paperwork. My name scrolled beneath Elaine's. Her name redacted, struck through in legal ink. Langston Tech officially absorbed Elaine Group. The NASDAQ ticker changed live. My team celebrated quietly. I posed for one photo, not smiling, just nodding. Because the victory wasn't the photo, it was the fact they had to ask for my permission to take it. That evening, I walked alone. No publicist, no assistant, just me and the pulse of the city. A girl around 10, walking with her mother, tugged at her sleeve as they passed me. "Is that the woman from the news?" she whispered. I paused, turned. "No," I said, meeting her eyes. "I'm the woman who made them rewrite the ending. Because sometimes the trash they throw out becomes the torch that burns their empire down,